Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jana Martin, Associate Director of UW-Madison, the Language Institute. I'm happy to welcome you to the third session of our Spring 2022 series. So welcome. The Language Collaboratory is a partnership for the advancement of intercollegiate dialogue on the teaching of languages and cultures, driven by language centers and institutes at the University of Iowa, the University of Michigan, the University of Minnesota, Michigan State University, and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Our aim is to provide collaborative professional learning opportunities for educators of language, culture, and literature at the 5 institutions and beyond. Our series this semester continues our goal for this year, furthering conversations on the topic of student engagement. We have addressed this issue from 2 perspectives. The first one, research, and the second one is pedagogical and practical. We aim to share insights and to encourage interinstitutional dialogue, bridging institutional distance, and fostering a collaborative interchange of ideas. You're invited to contribute to what we hope will be a lively discussion today. The sessions will be recorded and made available through each institution's website. We ask that you mute your microphone at the outset, that you use the tools in Zoom to contribute questions and comments in the chat, and that during the open discussion period, feel free to raise your hand virtually prior to activating your microphone. Closed captioning is available through the live transcript button in the Zoom menu bar. Today, what we'll be doing after the presentation, please post your questions in the chat or raise your hand, and we will not be asking questions during the presentation just to save the time. I am pleased to introduce Julie Larson-Guenette, who will discuss with us enjoyment as engagement, sample activities for the language classroom. A little bit about Julie. So Julie Larson-Guenette is teaching faculty for the undergraduate German program in the Department of German, Nordic, and Slavic Plus at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her current interests include instructed SLA, second language acquisition, learner variables and strategies relative to second language literacy, and a German-American experience. She is also the faculty director for the University of Wisconsin's International Learning Community, Stockwerk Deutsch, and a member of the UW System Placement Testing Committee for German. Prior to returning to Madison, Julie has taught undergraduate and graduate level courses on language teaching methods, content literacy, and linguistics. This session will explore how enjoyable and even fun activities can engage language learners at various levels. Specifically, this presentation will demonstrate sample activities for classroom warm-ups, along with initiating developmental and continuing activities that foster collaboration, engagement, and enjoyment. Before we begin our discussion, though, I would like to encourage everyone to attend our next session, which will be held on Thursday, April 7th at the same time. On that date, we will hear from Asma Ben-Ramtane from the University of Iowa. The topic of her talk will be maintaining student engagement in a post-COVID world. And then we have another session right after, so on April 14th. This will be presented by Kate Bassani from Carla in Minnesota. It's called Strategies for Creating a Classroom Community of Practice. And now, actually, right before you go, after today's session, you will receive an email inviting you to provide feedback about today's session. So please consider that. We really appreciate your comments. And now, with no further ado, let's begin.
Okay, thank you everybody for joining us today. I'm actually going to share my screen. Let's see, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, how about now? Is it bigger?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so I actually didn't teach on Zoom last year. I had some in-person courses and then online courses. I had used Blackboard Collaborate. So I'm still a novice when it comes to Zoom presentations. So this is the plan today, and I know time is always precious. And so what I would like to start off with is to just kind of go through a broad range of sample activities, including some warm up, initiating, developing, continuing activities. And I can also speak to which levels some of these would be maybe better oriented towards maybe than others. And then at the end, I want to offer a sample activity set for using the imperative mood, giving commands or telling someone to do something, right? And then after, to have time for Q&A and discussion. So I really look forward to hearing your feedback and sharing ideas, and I'm excited to learn from all of you as well. So first off, sample warm-up activities. These are things that, and I should also say that I teach for the most part intermediate level courses, a few advanced courses, but I would say a lot of the students in the advanced course levels are still at the intermediate level. And so sample warm-up activities, and those of you who are German teachers, feel free to email me at a later time. I can send you these slides in German. But to kind of get students going and getting them warmed up using language and trying to, have a little bit of fun. That was a theme in the pandemic too, is like, how can we keep spirits up? How can we have fun? And so 2 offerings here I have for you would be one called Would You Rather, right? So these are games that, I did not make these up. They're just variations of continuing things that we've kind of always done in our culture. Would you rather, and then give a reason, right? So you might have 5 or 7 items, and it could be things like, would you rather spend a day alone in a stadium or in an airport? And then give a reason, right? So pick one and give a reason. Would you rather have an 80s hairstyle or wear an 80s outfit? Would you rather be a dwarf or a giant? And some of these can be really kind of silly and funny. Would you rather listen to death metal or techno or something? And then the other is Have You Ever? And this is, maybe a little bit more towards intermediate, more advanced, to say, yes, I've done this thing, and then to explain or maybe tell a story that might go along with it. So, have you ever eaten Nutella directly out of the jar, or it could be peanut butter or something else? Have you ever cut your own hair? And so this one's always fun because students will share stories about when they were kids and got a pair of scissors and cut their hair. Have you ever lost your cell phone? And so these are things that students often have things to say, right? So this is a good, I've used this, I don't know, in several different classes, depending on, how much time. I always allow maybe 5-6 minutes. But I also see if students are enjoying themselves and having a good time and they're talking and they're using the target language, I'll let them go longer. So sometimes, this activity could go upwards towards 8 to 10 minutes, depending. So those are some sample warm-ups. An initiating activity, if we have time at the end, we could do this one together. But if some of you might remember Mad Libs, what we used to take on road trips and things. And this is basically fill out a list. And so I've used something here. We've got superhero, nouns. I find it easier to use plural nouns with German just because of morphology. And students fill out this list, kind of hold on to it. And then I give them a text template. And with a partner, they read their text out loud and insert the vocab. And this is always a fun activity because we produce some really ridiculous sorts of things. I've had students laugh so hard they're almost in tears. And if there's time and you want to continue with this, you can also share out, and we can borrow things from all the different groups and create an entire class version. And so here's our list. And then this would be our template. And this is adapted from a fairy tale, a Grimm's fairy tale. And so, once upon a time, there was a superhero named Batman who lived without shorts. They had no more teeth. To wear, they only had scarves. A stranger gave them coffee, which was all they could drink, right? And the story goes on. And this is kind of a fun way to give students a template for language, have them insert some language, have fun, be creative. This is a good probably 10, 15 minute, maybe sometimes 20-minute activity, just depends on your students and how far they want to take it. Another initiating activity is I call this Who Am I? The goal is for students to use language and a way to get to know historical and cultural figures. And so this is, for example, I did a unit on the '68 student movement in West Germany. And so students received cards. I don't know if you can see these. They received cards with images, and on the back have your information. And this is just kind of general, where were they born? What did they study? And so students get each of these. It depends on how many students you have. I think I had a total of 7 or 8 people, and they just have to go around and mingle and interact. And the goal is to become familiar with some of these figures that we might read about later or work with later. And this is something that students from a few years ago now, they still remember this. They still remember this activity as one that they enjoyed. And so what I did is I just took bamboo skewers and used old file folders and cut them up and stapled. And so anyhow, so that's a sample initiating activity. A sample developing activity is we've seen, police shows, detective shows where they have like an evidence board, sometimes called a crazy wall. And I use this for text comprehension. And for those of you familiar with German, the genre of the detective story is really popular, Krimi. And so what I have students do in a third-year language course, we read a modern detective story, and what they're tasked with doing as a comprehension activity is piecing together information from the text. And so things like images, I might write phrases. I do this on index cards, and I bring string and tacks. And if we're lucky to be in a room that has cork boards and things like that, I was in a seminar room one time and we were able to do that. And so this is what it looked like. So students, this was in a seminar room, and there's lots of pieces of information. And so they have to work together to arrange elements of the story, characters, place, setting, things that have happened. How are these, characters connected? What do we know about them? And what I like about this activity is that, they had read the story for class, and coming into class now we have this sort of a little bit more receptive activity where they now can recall things from the text and organize them in a way. And so this works really well as a comprehension activity. And it doesn't have to be a detective story. It could also be, for example, if you're working with a film or any kind of short story or text. I think it's very adaptable. This was spring of 2020, so no one was wearing masks then, just before the pandemic, actually. And then this past fall, I did this again, and I was in a different room, and I had brought tape, and students didn't want to use tape, so they said, can we use the floor? And so it was like, all right, let's do it. So we pushed all the desks back, and they arranged the cards. We didn't use the string this time, but it still worked out. And this was just part of the activity, I don't think I have another picture, but then someone spilled their coffee on the cars and said, oh, now it's like a real police station. So this is something that students also too, when I run into them, they remember this activity, they recall that and say things like, I never thought we would do something like this. So I really enjoy it. It takes time, obviously, to put together materials, but once you've made them, you have them. Okay, moving on. Another developing activity, I kind of call this divide and conquer, draw and present. So summarizing information. So let's say we have a text or an article that has various sections and subheadings, and maybe they read the article for class or not. And what we do is give students portions of the text. And in doing this, they have to collaborate, they have to read, they have to summarize. They will create a visual representation, like what are the most important pieces of information. And I'll bring a bag of markers and some paper. And so then they will work on that to present their information. And so this is something that takes a good chunk of time, I would say 20, 25 minutes or more. From start to finish, but students, they enjoy putting together the images, and sometimes you see them laughing or arguing, but in a positive, jokingly way. So this is, for example, we worked with a text on wellness, and so these are examples from things that students had done. So one was about being active, and each image represents a talking point when they presented. And I should say they worked in groups of 2 or 3. And one about mindfulness, for example. And so this has more text on it, maybe fewer images. And students have the creativity and choice to do how they want to present it and what information. And then one about sleep, one about, having community, social ties, these kinds of things. And so this was a nice way to work with the text and get through some information. Students could be creative, and I really enjoy this format, especially when we're working with more informative kinds of texts and articles. A continuing, also kind of summarizing activity is what I kind of call conversation hangouts for extended discourse. And this is really more geared towards probably intermediate and advanced students. After we've worked with maybe a longer text or with a unit, for example. And what I'll do is I'll take 8x11 paper and put themes, topics, quotes, or questions based on the text or the unit. And then students can go around the room and decide what do they want to talk about with each other. And you can also set parameters if you want students to say, okay, no more than 3 people per station or 4 people per station, or in the course of the activity, you need to address at least 2 items or 3 items, however you want to do it. And I did this last year in a 300 level topics course where we had read a batch of letters from soldiers during World War II, writing back to loved ones at home, and then also letters that people had written to soldiers. And we had different themes, different questions, quotes, and we put those around the room. And students really, I think they enjoyed having the choice to pick and choose what they wanted to talk about. And they really did a great job staying at those stations, for longer than, sometimes you give students activities and they kind of say what they want to say and then they're done, right? So this is something that really fosters, I think, more extended discourse, and to have it be more of a conversation and students can interact. And what I liked about this activity is that I got to go around and check in with each group too, and also participate in the conversations. And so this activity actually took longer than I thought it would, because the students were so into it. I just let them kind of ride it out. And I actually didn't get through the whole lesson that day, but again, if they were engaged and they were enjoying themselves and they were using the target language, I let them stay with it. Let me just check the time real quick. Okay, so real quick, I'm going to give a sample activity set for using the imperative. And again, thinking about imperative in the respective languages, do you want to use formal, informal, singular, plural? And so this is something we can start with a physical warm up, and I'll do this sometimes in classes if we're not doing the imperative. But thinking about exercises you can do seated or standing. And so things like roll your neck left to right, roll your shoulders forward and back, tap your arms, tap your legs, kind of get that blood flow going. Stretch, reach for the sky while you're there, pick some apples, and students, even wearing masks, you can see them kind of smiling and giggling sometimes with some of these. So, and then if students want to offer suggestions, you can do that too. So you can also riff off of students. Initiating activity, most of us are familiar with the fairy tale Cinderella and the evil stepsisters. And so in this activity, you in groups are the stepsisters, and now you need to tell Cinderella what to do. And you're going to use the imperative, right? So it's like, Cinderella, make my coffee, make my bed, set the table, scrub the toilet, wash my dress, bake the bread, etc., wash the floor. And for students who are a little more theatrical, I think they enjoy this. I did this last fall, and I heard things like Cinderella. So this is part 2 of that activity set. And then moving again towards giving simple advice. What would you say? So thinking about scenarios relevant to students' lives, and have students respond to these scenarios using the imperatives, right? So, your roommate pulled an all-nighter, they are exhausted. What would you say, right? Say, wow, you look really tired, go to bed, right? Take a nap or something. And so these are things that, you could come up with thinking about what you know about your students and their lives, their living situations, perhaps. And, again, using imperative again. And then lastly, if it's a nice day, especially out in the fall or spring, I had given students a list of kind of life tips from I think it was a professional business kind of website. And there were 100 items on this page. And so the students could kind of scan through and see what items that they liked. And we went outside. I had sidewalk chalk, and we went around the building. And they wrote phrases that they liked. So here's a group picture, and of course they use some code switching here. Learn eine Sprache, right? Learn a language. So so hopefully we're okay with time. I went a little over, but nonetheless, I'm happy to entertain questions.
Thank you so much, Julie. Little clap. This is really engaging. So we have a lot of applause coming in. I would like to invite everybody to feel free to ask Julie any questions that you have with respect to what she talked about. Feel free to share your own ideas with the group. We take either questions from the chat, or just please go ahead and raise your hand. We have some comments on the activities that you mentioned. I believe there were a few questions as well.
Yeah, there are a couple of questions. One question was from Rachel, and there was a suggestion as well in the chat, but Rachel wanted to know if you had ideas on how to transition the activity of the virtual board more into a virtual environment. And there was one suggestion to use Jamboard. Do you have any others or any comments on that?
So I think when I was looking for clip art for the boards, I think there might be some online templates to create those. And I'm not super technologically inclined. I'm happy to learn. Would love to find more opportunities to incorporate those elements for sure. But I believe that there might be some online templates for those.
Thank you.
If anybody has experience with it.
Yeah, if you have any other ideas, type them in the chat or raise your hand to share. Otherwise, I'm volunteering Rachel to try it out and let us know how it goes in a virtual environment. The next question is from Beth, and it says, do you create all the evidence index cards in advance or have students generate them?
I created them just because it takes time. And I think that it goes quicker when I create these materials. I could be wrong, but I might have 60 or 70 cards. So these are things that I think students could create them, but we would probably spend an entire class period creating those, and then, you know, thinking about students going back to the text and trying to find information and pull out information. I just find it more efficient to give them the language and let them work with it and let them use it.
Thank you. And we have I think a reaction or expanding on one of the ideas from Mike Marker about using a video clip for as a prompt for retelling a story and having the students come up with their own sequencing of what happened and then rewatch the video.
Yes.
And I invite anyone who has further comments that want to contribute live, just raise your hand and we'll be happy to take your input as well. We have some other comments about the thanking you for sharing the ideas. I actually put one on the activity for the Chalk Talks, and to me, it was a great way to bring visibility to your languages on campus and getting people intrigued by what these messages meant and have to say, and trying to see others. Really, primarily, it's just to thank you for all the wonderful ideas and for sharing.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad to see some familiar folks in the chat and here on the Zoom.
So I have a question, Julie.
Yes.
If we look back on engagement and how we understand engagement and how we're linking it together with enjoyment, what do you think are some of the main components of what you talked about today? Just to kind of bring it all together, because I did know that there were, I mean, all your activities had a lot of things in common. They demonstrated agency of the student. They gave them a choice, right? What are some of the other things, like when you're designing these activities? What is your guide?
I really like the idea. I'm getting more interested in the idea of, and it's harder in virtual environments, obviously, but this idea of the tactile and of handling things and using things. And I try to think of any ways possible to get students out of their seats. And of course, you know, we're often at the mercy of our classroom space. And this semester, for example, I'm in some rooms that feel like little shoe boxes. So I'm not able to do more movement and kinds of things. But I try to think about, you know, if I'm sitting in a desk for 50 minutes, you know, what might I like to do? And I really do try to think, okay, I have this material, I have this content, how can I work with it that is going to be meaningful and going to be memorable, right? And so I really appreciate when I see students, you know, later on or semesters later and, you know, chit chat and like, oh, I love that activity we did with such and such, you know, and it's like, oh, they remember that. And also too, I think Yana, you and I talked about this earlier, as students, the time goes really fast. Like they realize they're into something, and then they look at the clock and they realize 10 minutes went by, 15 minutes went by, and so forth. So They're really in that moment, right? And I think this is a good takeaway. It's like being present in the activity, in the moment.
And I think that's a really good thought to close us in and to stop the recording. We have a comment from Heidi agreeing, and I think it's really wonderful too, and also from Mike, just foregrounding the importance of more tactable things to do, especially coming back from isolation and pandemic. So I'll stop the recording.